So apparently the next iteration of the Ghost Recon series is coming out in 2025, and I think a lot of the community is really hoping that this launch goes off and comes out in a much more polished state than Breakpoint, because that really hampered the community in this game, despite it later in its life cycle becoming a great game. It really held back the game from taking off as it should have, and we're hoping that Ubisoft learned from the last release and we see something a little better coming out in the next year. Thankfully, they canceled the very off-brand idea that they had for the next Ghost Recon. So with that canceled, I'm hoping that's a sign that they're going to keep back to the core identity of Ghost Recon, which is to be a tactical shooter, and not just a first-person shooter, not a looter shooter, not a Destiny, nothing like that. So here's hoping. Anyways, I have some ideas that given that I'd played in the milsim community for a lot longer than I care to admit, over 1,000 hours. But I think that appealing to the milsim community is the bread and butter of the Ghost Recon series, because that's the players that will stay with the game, continue to invest in it, buy DLCs, continue to play it, keep the community alive. So coming from that community and knowing like a lot of the same, gripes and wish lists that I hear over and over, I'm gonna lay those out and see if you like these recommendations, and you also played the Ghost Recon Breakpoint game, then let me know if this is something you agree with, or if you don't agree with it, you can also leave a comment as to why down below. So the crux of the issue with Breakpoint, I think, is that they drifted away from the identity of the game too much. I think a tip that I would offer Ubisoft is that features that work in some games don't necessarily work in any game, and so the less features you put in, but ensuring that they are more polished and extremely, well done, will get you a much better return than if you just try to ham fist any feature that had worked in any other games in the past. So a great example of Breakpoint was the gear system. Nobody wanted that, and the raids, nobody really wanted to play those. They became sort of a chore that you had to do to get some unlocks that were hidden behind it, but it's just not in the spirit of the game. And avoiding putting those into the next Ghost Recon will help keep the game a little more true to itself. And that ties into another issue that really held Breakpoint back, which is that the community was over fractured into way too many niches. And this comes up like when you look at the matchmaking menu. You've got like faction missions, you've got story missions, you've got immersive mode, you've got raid, you've got exploration. Honestly, the Breakpoint community that plays this game will break down into one of three groups. Either they're just playing through the game for the first time, they're looking for items that are in the world, and so they're just basically like looking to go quickly and to gather up as many things as they are missing. And then third is the milsim community, which is the ones who just play the game open world style and replay areas, replay missions, but they're looking to get that immersive experience. You could lump PvP into maybe a fourth group, but I really don't think that even PvP is hugely necessary to the Breakpoint community. And delaying that until you're very confident with the game's actual spirit and the state of it at launch, I think that would probably be prudent. Bring PvP later, or at least release it extremely polished. One or the other. It can't be half done, because it will just kill the community's motivation to play in there. So some direct features that I hope they change would be things like maybe in the beginning of the story mode, there's a bit of a tutorial for how to clear rooms as like a squad. Maybe just a 2-man team would be fine, or a 4-man team. But just teaching new players that, like when you enter the door, not to stand in the door and move into the room, and to allow your teammates to pile in behind you, pick a side that you're going to work from. That's pretty high level, but in terms of like a multiplayer game, that's more casual. But if they want to go in the tactical route, I think that teaching players early how to do that will help in the PvP scenario, and also draw more of the players to the milsim community, which will make them endure and stay longer in general. Um, Adding a health indicator. So you'll notice I'm playing on no HUD here, and this is how most people who ended up playing the game for a large amount of time ended up playing the game, which is extreme difficulty, no all maximum realism settings, no HUD. Just really creates a much better immersive experience. But a couple things need tweaking to keep this alive, which is there needs to be a way to tell if you're wounded without needing a HUD marker. So like some sort of mechanic with the character, the way the character moves. I probably would recommend adding a health regen mechanic just for the bars of health. I know that we all turn off health regen, but making it so that if you're just missing like a fraction of a bar, that just regenerates. It would really simplify, uh, just like your perk choices and whatnot. So, if I fall off a rock that's 10 feet high, I don't want to have to be injured and need to use a bandage. So just adding a small amount of forced health regen would, again, collapse the community into one setting. Bring back ghost mode is a big one, and then also make sure that people can't skirt around ghost mode dying penalties by just turning off their PlayStation or pulling up the internet cord. I think that if that happens, then ultimately they need to just assume the character died and start over because Wildlands got really poisoned by that. There was no actual stakes in ghost mode because everybody just canceled if they ever died and then started it up again. So there was no stakes to play, as it were. Another big change, the host should be able to lock the settings for everyone in the lobby. And I know this might be a little contentious, but I think one of the things that Ubisoft overdid here too is just too many settings. And nobody's playing the same game when you're in a lobby because some people are Terminators who just can't be killed and they just run into the base and alert everyone. No consequences for them, but all the players playing on harder difficulties are basically immediately dead if you manage to get, the whole base alerted and we haven't even gotten a foothold yet. So I think that there needs to be an option for the host to lock settings just to keep the identity of each lobby consistent and again not over fractionalizing it. So in that same vein, I think they should also be able to ban certain like basically items, classes, perks, etc. I think that making that very complex would be a big addition to the game. So things like active camo, drone use. I think a lot of the classes were overpowered, and so if they're going to release classes like that, you need to be able to ban the abilities of them. So like the Echelon and the Pathfinder are silly in this game after they were released later in the DLCs. They like just being able to airstrike an entire base as the Pathfinder and not be in any danger was just ruining the game. Or like the ability to see through walls was giving players no incentive to work as a team, right? Because it's just a race to the target that's been highlighted. So I would probably recommend just not including overpowered classes, but if you are going to include them, just to make the DLCs really quick to sell. I worry that it'll destroy the community in the long term, but if it's not negotiable that they're going to release those types of classes and abilities, at least make them bannable. Investing in a easy to use hand signal system. In this game, you can do emotes, but they hold you still and you stand up, which basically makes them unusable. If they made it so that you could stay crouching, you could continue moving. It was just sort of like almost like the cloaking sprays used in here, where you can keep moving around while you're doing it. That would really help with another problem in this game's tactical aspect, which is mic saturation. Everyone starts calling out info. It becomes a very chaotic because you can't do things without your mic that you'd be able to do in real life. Just simulating hold, simulating like enemies ahead, simulating like move forward. Just basic stuff like that on the emote wheel would be really nice and help keep the mics a little bit less saturated when we're trying to get immersive and play in close quarters room clearing. So in addition to that, adding friendly fire would be a really big addition. I feel like it would also create more tactical decisions when you're clearing rooms because it'll teach people to avoid walking in front of each other, and adding a penalty if you team kill too much is going to obviously be essential. So if you team kill twice in a short amount of time, then you just automatically get kicked or something. That would obviously work. Another silly immersion breaking mechanic that was always bothering was add stamina drain to crouch walk, because as it is now, everyone just walks around and crouch walk the whole time, which is really weird sort of perception. Like you just don't. It doesn't really look realistic, and it kind of is off-putting. So adding a stamina drain to crouch walk would be really useful, and would force people to actually think about walking upright and taking advantage of some of the perks that come with that, i.e. faster moving, especially when room clearing. Very simple change. Add stamina drain to crouch walking. Seeing teammates' lasers and flashlights and making them separate attachments would be, that was Wildlands, and then they just didn't include in Breakpoint, so please include that again. Not having that made it really complicated, always at least setting up which targets, who's taking what. It's always a giant conversation on the mic when it could be very simple. And speeding up the weapon mobility. Actually, before I go into that, also the bipod and the rangefinder need to actually do that job. So like you should be able to deploy the bipod, and the rangefinder should have the binoculars rangefinding effect built into it, so that when you're looking down your scope, you are automatically rangefinding enemies. Weapon mobility. So the game also released way too slow while aiming. I think they got a good amount once they got the weapon mobility maxed. So if they could just release the game in that state where you move this fast while aiming, that would be perfect, because you need to be able to do that in order to do close quarters stuff. The ability to roll out of animations. So when we're activating computers, when we're hitting switches, certain things like that, the ability to cancel those animations, or picking up bodies is another one. It would be really helpful if they would make that cancelable, because it results in a lot of silly deaths in the game, especially if they put ghost mode out. So they're going to need to include a way to cancel those. Also, like with picking up bodies, that should just be faster. You should be able to just drag bodies as well. Keeping the class system was a great addition to Breakpoint. Again, just make sure you don't release overpowered stuff. It'll ruin the immersive aspect of the game. Helping or making it so that all lights can be shot would be another big feature. So there's a lot of lights that can only be taken out with EMPs in this game, and it just doesn't really make sense. But making that not an issue anymore would be helpful. Maybe even if it's just a gun or some sort of device that lets you knock out lights quietly, that would be helpful. Dynamic enemy detection is another big one. So enemies should be able to just start detecting you at different ranges depending on the circumstances. Are they elevated? Is it dark? Are they looking through brush? Is a really painful one in this game, because like the brush doesn't exist for enemies, but it does for you. So you can't see them, and then randomly you'll start taking fire through a bush. So that would be helpful. Invest in replayability features. So randomizing enemy spawns more, and even better if they could make areas of the map that are randomly or like procedurally generated, so that you can't just memorize the world, and then you actually have to approach each phase with like a little bit more of a system and like a tactics minded or mindset, rather than just knowing, okay, there's a snipers on the top of these roofs, and then we can take the artillery, and then like whatever it is. The point is just making it so that the game stays fresh via unpredictability would be a big addition. On that same vein, adding more enemies into the bases than exists would be helpful, and making them a little bit faster at shooting you and like killing you when they have you in line. So as it is now, when you're running a 4-man squad, there's just not enough enemies to go around in this game. And I would honestly encourage them to make it a 5 or 6-man squad max, just so that having snipers is a bit more reasonable. As it is now, you give up a lot of your firepower when you have a 3-man squad on the ground. Like if somebody goes down, there's one person to revive, one to cover, but you're running really slim with a 4-man squad. So making it 5, I think, would be a really helpful change. No range stats on weapons, so the bullet drop should be the same forever. That way you can actually begin to learn the different rifles, and sniping would also have a benefit in that regard. A couple things about sound. As you can see in this clip, they really need to include much more meaty or growly sounding shots that are both suppressed and unsuppressed. They did resound sample the M4, the ACR, and some other guns, like one of the G28, but it was kind of too little too late, and they never really finished. They just did a couple guns, and then they sort of gave up. But it's very important in the immersive side to make sure the audible aspect of the game is very pleasing to the ear as well. And then a couple other things about sound too. So the silencer dynamic audible range would be really useful based on your caliber. So if you're losing, I don't know if anyone's seen the Barry TV series, but watch the hideout clearing scene there and see how loud an M4 is when it's suppressed. It should still sound pretty bassy and scary, and the enemy should be able to detect you from much further than they do in this game, unless you're running something like a 9mm. So yeah, making a dynamic detection range for suppressors and for unsuppressed weapons should be included, and it should be much further than it is in this game. And that goes for flashbangs too. They're way too quiet, and they don't seem to alert anybody, even if they go off maybe 50 feet away. So that should probably, if they're outdoors, be very far range, and then if they're indoors, maybe reduced due to the sound bouncing around inside. Suppressors shouldn't be removable on the fly, I don't think. So you should have to pick. Are you going for stealth or are you going for damage? As of now, there's no reason to take any real other muzzle attachment just because suppressor can be removed at any point, and there's no real downside to it. 50 caliber sniper rifles probably shouldn't be suppressible in this game, or if they are, it should barely make a difference. They're not meant to be quiet. They're meant to just make it hard to locate exactly where they're coming from. So that might be a way to balance some of the sniper rifles in this game. Because as of now, nobody ever used any of the non-50 cal sniper rifles just because why would you? You just take more damage and better range. So I hope they address that and make the muzzle brakes and compensators more stand out than they were in this game, just because they became a bit of a niche just as you got into the immersive side. You would just not use suppressors purely so that you didn't have to listen to that soft sound and game-breaking mechanic. So also the sound effect for when you're playing with no HUD for firing mode changes and like swapping to grenade underbarrel, that should probably be a little bit more discernible. It's a little hard to tell, especially under fire, if, like what fire mode you're on, whereas in real life you could just look at your gun or you would know, but from muscle memory. So they have to make sure that that is easily distinguishable. For sound that you hear enemies from, there is a hidden stat in this, or change in this game. If you change voice volume to about 10% or so, you'll start to only hear enemies' footsteps from a range of that's more realistic. So like if they're like, 15 feet away or so, that is A, much more useful, B, much more realistic, and C, it really helps you with close quarters because you can actually tell where enemies are when you're hearing, and that is something that I feel like the game's setting it default to 100, where you hear people at 200 meters or so. It's a little silly. Making knife animations randomized, so only one or two knife animations ever really get seen in this game unless it's very rare to be on like a hill. So just making that randomized would help us break up the monotony of the knife animations. Ensuring that all weapons have niches, so there's far too much best-in-class weapons in this game, and or the only ones with good sounds. So yeah, just ensuring that they make each of the games have a bit more standoutness. But they were a little lazy on the damage values and the handling values. Like you've only got a couple different options. Things are either like assault rifles are either 22 damage, 27 or 32. I think there's a couple that are 37, but the point is like they're just too similar, and there's no real niche. So usually you just pick the best in class. So yeah, I hope they address that. So yeah, I think that basically covers everything with sound. Again, just really trying to make it so that the Extreme Elite No HUD player base is not getting hit with these very silly sort of difficulties that shouldn't actually exist. I think the injury system also needs to be a bit more unpredictable. Right now, it caps at 50% injury resistance, and what it basically does is just makes you get injured on the third, fifth, and seventh hit. So adding an actual probability into there would create a much more organic and like high stakes appeal to it, where getting hit even once is a bit of a gamble. And as of now, people can still run a little bit too aggressive and not really have any fear that something is like if something hits them that they're going to get injured. So I would also like to see the the injury system get a bit more fleshed out too, in terms of like how you get injured. So maybe you take a leg injury, but maybe you take an arm injury, and they have different effects like firing accuracy versus mobility. Those are all really simple changes that I think are not too hard to incorporate into the game. So while I finish clearing this space here, I did notice a couple of janky sort of things that weren't really polished up in the game as well. Knife animations tend to disconnect. You'll see it on a couple of the different knives up ahead here. And also the third person hip fire is all but unusable in this game. So it's only realistically useful at like 10 feet or so, and there's a couple problems with the animation. So you get locked into your trajectory of motion. So like if you're strafing to the right and you start hip firing, you'll be forced to keep doing that for like a portion of a second there, and yeah, you can't really break the animation. It also changes the speed that you're moving, which is really disorientating when you're trying to hip fire. Especially we need this for when we're in close quarters. We don't need to be in first person as much, but can still retain rapid target acquisition. So yeah, you can see the knife animation there is kind of janky. It doesn't actually connect. So again, just another example of Ubisoft less features but more polished ones. If you're going to put it in, make sure it's pretty. Don't release it in a sloppy state, and that'll only hurt you. Even if the feature was nice to have, it'll just take away from the game. This is a great moment too, where it would have been great if I was actually having to use stamina to crouch walk when moving. I mean, not just when holding still. Like if you're pushed up against cover, whatever, fine. Or if you're not moving, fine. But imagine it would actually create some actual incentive to invest in some of the stamina perks in the game. As of now, there's no reason. And yeah, you'd have to like be like, okay, can I actually crouch walk that whole 200-meter distance before my legs get tired? It would be a nice little touch to the game and make it more complex and immersive. Here I'm going to force a prone knife animation, again, just because I'm so bored of the standard animation. So if you start the prone and then activate the knife animation midway through the animation, not too early, not too late, you can do this. Again, janky animations though weren't really, to this day still were never really finished. Yeah, like right now, I wish that I was burning stamina doing this, and it was a bit of a gamble, and maybe I had to pause partway through, or like there risk standing up a little bit, and yeah, trying to get some more speed and less stamina drain to close some of the distance while I can before they turn around. Here's another thing too. I wish that you could knife around corners and pull. And one of the animations, if you were pushed up against cover, was to pull them around the corner that, like against the wall you're at. Because there's a lot of situations like this where if there was another enemy there, I would be hesitant to knife them because I'm standing out like this. It would be so cool if we could, if one of the animations was to, if you're pushed up against the wall, it pulls them deep around the corner, deep enough that a teammate, for example, could take over the corner for you. That would be ideal. And again, encourage cooperation with squad mates. One of the big culture problems with this game was just the lack of incentive to work as a squad and just the incentive to run as a lone wolf because you're tanky enough to survive hits and you often are more rewarded for playing selfishly, like focusing on your own safety. But the game gets its maximum enjoyment, I think, for the most amount of people when it encourages it to be a tactical shooter, which is its spirit. So um, the more features that drive people that way, the better. Oh, there's another sound bug. So I took a hit, but you can't hear enemies shooting when they're in another room or behind glass. The behind glass one I could kind of understand, but I mean, let's be real here. It's not like it's going to be quiet. So yeah, they had like the sound filtered out based on room you're in, but that created some really wonky animations in the game. A relatively minor change, but when you're in third person and you're approaching a door, I wish that the camera would push off the wall by default and automatically swap you to the side that is like, so if you're against the right side of a wall, like to the right of the door, I wish the camera defaulted to the left side because most people don't want to just have their camera smushed against the wall. I think you should be able to force it that way in case you're trying to like get like a particular view or use, I don't know, like maybe a particular angle you want to check. But I think by default it shouldn't. Oh, and there you just saw another glitch where like switching shoulders causes a janky animation with the shoulder, or like the way you're holding the gun. Sometimes it's like reversed and your arms are going through your body. Um, these are all just cleanup recommendations though for Ubisoft. I don't think there's too many other tips I'd offer now. I think this you can just enjoy the rest of the footage. But here I'm clearing the base with no suppressor to emulate having a suppressor on a realistic sound. And you can see how I use movement, like constantly changing position to confuse the enemy as to where I am. I wish that the game incentivized this because this is more realistic about how it would be when you're clearing buildings like this. They know you're there, they just don't know where, and they're moving around searching based on the last sound they heard. But yeah, much more dynamic, and would encourage pistols and SMGs to have more of a niche, which would be really nice. So yeah, I think it would be well rewarded if they did that. If they just went full tilt into full realism.